Good morning, everybody. We're just going to take a few minutes to let everyone get into the call before we begin. Awesome. Well, I'm seeing a little bit less activity there. So welcome back to the Seed Savers Grafting class follow-up call. Today we are talking about disbudding and taping up. And we're back here with Lindy.
Hi.
And yeah, we're going to start with a video to kind of go over the basics. And then we'll pop back in and have the Q&A. You'll have a chance to ask your questions. So I will start sharing my screen. Okay.
Jamie, I'm not getting any audio on that. Does everybody else agree?
Oh. Okay, sorry about that, guys. 1 second. Let's see. Okay.
Welcome back to the Seed Savers Exchange Grafting Workshop. This is the third in a series of short courses that we've offered this spring, and it's one more step on the way to growing your own fruit tree. Earlier in the year, we grafted these trees and then stored them for a while. Our last session, we planted them in the garden or in the nursery bed. We're standing here in our nursery bed here at Seed Savers, where we have a couple hundred trees planted out from this spring's work. And the next step in this whole process is to control where the growth comes out on these trees. And by rubbing excess buds off, we just call it disbudding, we can put all the growth this tree has to offer out through one bud, and that's our goal. So let's look at this tree here. Okay, so here we have a tree that was planted out just a few weeks ago, and you're starting to see green shoots. The buds come out, they're a little red to start with. This one's turning green all the way up here. This cyanwood, I see 2 shoots coming off of that, and that's good. Even some of these just show a little bud swelling at this point, and that's still fine. So I want this shoot to be my chosen one. It's bigger than the upper one, so I'm going to just, without dislodging that cyanwood, I'm going to use my thumb and pick the bud off of there. So I'm going to put all the growth out that one shoot. Now I'm going to go down the rootstock stem and pick off all the other sprouted buds. Even some come from below the ground, so you want to work your way all the way down. Okay, there we have a clean stem, no extra buds. That one's going to take all the growth, and away it will go. We're going to look at another tree down the row here that's not quite as far along. Now on this tree, you see there's a little swelling on that bud, but not much. I'm hardly seeing green on it at all, but just the fact that it's swollen a little bit is encouraging. At this point, even if I don't see swelling, I'm going to let them go. There's always a chance, and I'm still going to rub the excess buds off the rootstock. They're just little red nodes. And so again, all the energy is going up that stem, and we kind of give it one last resort, and that's to push growth out this cyanwood. Okay, in a matter of weeks, you're going to end up with a shoot. This one's only about 3 inches long. usually in the 3 to 6 inch range is when I like to do this. The stem is still really flexible, and all I'm doing here is turning it up so that it's going to grow straight up instead of having a sweep coming off the rootstock. There's nothing structurally wrong with the sweep, but I just kind of like to have a straighter trunk. It's really easy to come in when this is still flexible with a piece of masking tape and simply take that into an upright position. If that tape stays on for, say, 2 months, 3 months, it'll be the stem will be fixed in that upright position. The tape will degrade in the weather, and you shouldn't have to worry about it in the future. So with that, good luck with your grafts.
Alrighty, well, that was our little how-to. Feel free to start sending your questions in the chat. And with a group this small, you're also welcome to raise your hand, which you can do at the bottom of your screen on the reactions button. And we'll call on you and you can ask your question that way. But to start us off, we had a few people email in questions ahead of time. So Lindy, SJ Spears emailed and said, taping up the top shoot to form the main stem, doesn't the tape stick and affect the growth of the shoot?
Well, that's why I use masking tape. It's not very sticky, and usually by midsummer, it's kind of totally lost its stickum, so it would come off. And the tree, as it starts to grow, the expansion of the diameter of that stem has incredible power. You've probably all seen where a tree root pushed up a sidewalk. And that's, they could move mountains, literally. So it's not gonna be held up by a little piece of masking tape. If the tree gets to where it fills all that space inside your little ring of masking tape, it'll just break through it. More likely, the masking tape will degrade and start flaking apart before that time it comes. So certainly there are other materials, some plastic tapes that could constrict the tree. So I'd be careful of what you use, but masking tape has always worked for me. In a nursery setting, we always use these little tools called a tapener, and it's got a little plastic piece and it staples it around a tree. That's used a lot for training. And even that, the little plastic piece, in time, the tree will just break it off if it gets too tight. So I just wouldn't worry about it.
Awesome. We have one other question that was emailed in ahead of time. So I have a question about the proper use of the seedling protectors that we have around the grafted shoots. They are tubes of rather rigid material that can stand on their own, but they're much taller than my trees, so I fear that they're not getting enough sun. Should I shorten them, or will that defeat the purpose?
It depends on what material it is. If it's a grow tube is what I think you're talking about, which is something used in forestry. Some light penetrates those, and you can put one of those up on a pretty small little, say, an oak seedling or even a pine seedling, and the tree will grow right on up because there's light coming in the top of that, and it's going to grow toward that light, and it will cause a tree to grow upright very quickly. Now, that said, with that protector around it, you're going to have to take it off when you want to work on the tree. If you want to take all the excess leaves off, like we just showed, you're going to just have to be able to pull that off, work on the tree, put it back on. So I would have that thing at least 2 feet, if not 3, and it'll probably clear the top of a 3-foot grow tube by the end of the season. If not, it could easily. I've had trees get 4 feet in one growing season after grafting. So if it's a grow tube like forestry uses, I think the tree is fine in there.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindy. Okay, we have another question. Can you please repeat why we tape up our trees? My screen froze and I had to restart.
Okay. This is just something from my background as a nursery person. We grow trees and we train them, and selling a nursery tree, you kind of want a straight trunk. So we would graft trees. When that shoot came out, we would tape it up so that it was a straight shoot instead of a sweep coming out the side. Either way works. I just like to train it up for a straight shot on a straight trunk. It's probably more aesthetic than anything else, because you can plant a rootstock with a shoot on it that has a sweep off of it. You can still grow a fine tree from that. I'm just being fussy and want it to look like a straight trunk when I'm done.
So we have someone that said, I don't have any growth or swelling on my scions. Should I be concerned?
Probably, if it has, depending on how long they've been in, outside of storage, you should be seeing them now. If they've been planted out for a week or more, I would expect to see swelling of the buds. I'll tell a story. I just picked up a week or so ago from Jamie here a package of trees that I had grafted during the workshop, first phase, and I wanted some trees I could grow on and take pictures of as we go along to help explain all these things. Well, I picked them up, and then we had rain and rain and rain. Yeah, and I never got them planted until Monday of this week. Now, 2 of the 5 had buds that were actually opening, but the other 3 had buds that were swollen but not open. This was really a wonderful thing to plant them out knowing that those buds were swelling and the tree was starting to grow. I'm quite certain they will all take. But if I take them out and plant them, and I'm already from Monday to Friday, I'm seeing a little growth. The ones that have swollen buds, those buds are starting to break open. The ones that have leaves, the leaves are unfurling a little more. So that's how fast they respond to planting out, getting some sunshine. That's going to really make them want to grow. If you're not seeing growth at this point, I wouldn't totally give up hope. I'm going to just let those be until you what will really tell the tale. The bark on your scionwood is really smooth, and if it starts to crinkle a little bit like a prune or a raisin drying out, it's over. At that point, I would make one of several choices. I would choose one shoot off the rootstock and prune everything else off and grow that one shoot. So next year I'd have another piece of rootstock to graft onto. that would probably be the first thing I'd try. A person could also grow those on, get them established, and form a stool block if you wanted to generate more rooted rootstock stems. But I would, the first thing I'd try is just train one shoot off the rootstock and save it for next year's grafting.
Awesome. So we have a question from Mike who says, I did some grafting last year through this program. All 5 of my trees were alive when we went into winter. They were fenced and in tubes for the winter, but it seems that none of the trees have survived. Do you have any idea what went wrong?
Well, not knowing where you're located in the country, it was a mild winter here, and we didn't see much loss over winter due to temperatures. So I'd be surprised if that was the case. The things that can affect them are simply temperatures. A few years ago here in Decorah, Iowa, we had a -40 ultimate low. It killed a number of things, and I could see it ruining a young grafted tree. But we didn't have anything near that here this winter. We had a very mild winter. The other thing is usually rodents, and if you're not seeing that the bark has been girdled around the base, that's the other thing I would next look at. But you say they're protected, so once in a while, a tree tube or one of those spirals or whatever you use doesn't get quite down to the ground. The rodents can girdle them anyway. So I'd look really close at the base and see if they've been damaged. I have seen trees that were damaged from underneath. Right here in our orchard, we have gophers, and they can come in underneath a tree and simply remove all the roots. And that's pretty hard for the tree to survive too. So those are the biggest perils I think our trees are up against. There's a little detective work needed here to figure out what causes it. So if it's the just winter kill, temperature damage is probably the hardest one to figure out. If that were the case, I would expect all the bark on the whole system to be dead. But if it's rodent damage, you can see that it would be right at the base. So beyond that, boy, I'm not certain. I know a local vineyard here had damage from a drift from a neighbor's farm field, when they applied pesticides or herbicides to the farm field. And I don't know your situation, but it's perplexing, I'm sure.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, like Lindy was saying, sometimes we do see rodents damage the root system. And if your tree's already dead, I would pull it out and take a look and see if that might be the problem. We had about 500 trees planted in a nursery, and it wasn't very often, but we pull out all of the extras at the end of the year, and there were quite a few that you could see had been damaged, and you'd never know by looking at just the top of the tree. You can see, without pulling it out. So definitely, I would recommend, pulling it out, taking a look. Okay, so we have a question that says, I have one graft that seems like it failed. It doesn't have any bud swelling. I have some scion in good shape. Is there any advantage to waiting to do a bud graft, or should I just regraft it now?
I think you'd be a little late for grafting now. That said, yeah, you're not out anything if you wanted to try it. I would the latest I've ever done one here is May 1st. I grafted a tree on May 1st. and waited 2 weeks and planted it out and had good luck with that. If you grafted at the end of May, the problem is then you're gonna cool it down, let it set for 2 weeks, plant it out, and it's gonna be hot. It could work. I've planted bare root trees out in the middle of July before and had them live. So you could give it a try. Bud grafting later in the summer could be done. For that, just let the thing grow until then, and then you trim any branches that are in your way, make the bud graft union, and go from there. That won't grow until the following spring. So that's an option as well. But I've not, it's just to do a bench graft this late in the season, you're really pushing the edge of the window.
All right, so our next question, it says, doesn't a tree with a sweep have a greater chance of breaking at the trunk under a heavy fruit load?
Yes.
Okay, yep. Okay, we have one other question that just came in. Um, are there nutrients, organic, natural fertilizers, or anything that we should put or pour around our trees? Should that be done at all?
Yeah, you can do that. I would it doesn't hurt with a young apple tree to push it a little bit. So I don't know what you're used to using. I have a little organic, basically processed turkey manure based fertilizer that I could see side dressing with. Mostly I keep them mulched, weed free, watered, and I get good growth out of them anyway. But if you wanted to push them a little bit, if you're used to using a store-bought or you make a compost tea, anything like that, can't hurt. Usually organic fertilizer products are mild enough. You're not going to burn anything with them. So I'd go for it. It's fun to see a lot of growth this first summer.
Yeah. All right, we have another question that says, can you talk a bit about stooling, how to, etc.? There's not much information online.
Right, we're going to have to do our own video on this one because it comes up all the time. Now, some people do have, partial success, have a rootstock that's alive but not got a cyanwood on it. So the trees you got, the rootstocks that were sent to you, were produced in a stool block setting. So basically, you've got a stem, a tree planted that's established, so it's got a good root system under it, and then you coppice it. You cut it off at the ground or a couple inches above the ground. It'll branch out. It'll bush out at that point. When it does, I let it grow. You let it grow up to where it's 10, 12 inches tall, and you pile, I don't know, a potting mix or a compost mix around its base. So something fertile and something moist that's gonna, and the stems are gonna grow roots out into that. So then at the end of summer, you go along and you pull the compost material away, cut the trees off, cut the stems off at the base again, and you'll have a stem with little roots coming out of it. And that's simply how you produce, it's asexual propagation. You're just rooting the stems in this material and cutting them off, and you can do that annually. I had a couple of M7 roots that I did this 2 years ago, And I would get, early on, I'd get 5 or 6 stems a year, and then ultimately I was getting 15 stems a year. It's way more trees than I had room for. But I like to graft trees and give them away too. So the scenario is you let that tree grow and get established. I'd say the first year here, just keep it clean around it and let it grow big a tree as you can. Next spring, early, right as things thaw, cut it off a couple inches above the ground. Let it grow. Once it's grown 10, 12 inches, then you can put this material around the base so it can root into it. And then that in the late fall, you can once they've gone dormant, you can clean up the base, clean that material away from the base so that you can then cut them off. And it'll happen again next year. So it just repeats itself. Gets to be a bigger stool every year.
Awesome. Okay, we have another question. Do you have any advice on special care or shaping for fruit trees that took large amounts of storm damage, particularly to help them recover and to pick and start a new leader?
Yeah, pruning is such a nuanced and individualized process. But I have a big old tree. It's probably 30 years old out in one of my meadows. That a big portion of one side of it blew out last summer. And I just went in at the time and cut enough of it to get the limb out of the tree. And I am waiting, actually June, July here, I plan to go in and do some heavy pruning on that tree to balance it. It's right now really one-sided. In doing that, I'm going to make some big cuts, but those big cuts are going to be made so they're at a place where a shoot's coming off, another branch is coming off. I'll make that cut. Adjacent to that, I want a slope cut, not a bench cut. A bench cut is a stem that's facing straight up, so it's got a flat top. That's going to grow a little callus tissue rim around it. It's going to hold water, and it's going to rot the center of your tree for sure. So you can do some serious pruning on an existing old tree, but you just be careful not to leave those flat upright facing cuts. Go to a stem and cut next to that and thin it out. Most of us have trees that are too thick anyway. The storm may have been a friend.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little bit, I get a lot of emails about pruning, and so I have a guide that I've been sending out. So if you'd like that guide, feel free to email me. I believe Meredith sent out my email in the last information for this call. So we do have that available for you. Okay. Do we have any tips or suggestions for grafting apples to mature pear trees and vice versa?
Yes, don't do it. An apple is in the genus Malus, and a pear is in Pyrus, and they won't connect. They have to be in the same family. They have to be pears to pears, apples to apples. There's a big family, the prunus, cherries and plums that's one family. But you have to graft into the same genus.
All right. Sean has asked, I grafted some other trees this winter from another source, not from SSE, that took, but they are producing flower buds on the grafted cyanwood. Should I leave the buds, remove them, or just not worry about it?
Well, at this point, I'd probably leave them, but if they start swelling fruit, I'd nip those off in a hurry because the tree is going to put a tremendous amount of energy trying to make fruit. I'm worried that if you just nip the flowers off, there might be much leaf there. So leave that alone. But if they actually set a fruit before it's as big as a pea, I'd clip them out.
All right. Could I graft a mulberry on apple rootstock?
No, incompatible.
Awesome. Well, that looks like the end of our questions. We still have plenty of time, so again, if you have any extras, keep sending them in the chat. Also welcome to raise your hand.
I'll just ramble on a little bit. This has been fun for me to. It's been a while since I grew small grafted trees at my own garden. So having planted some out on Monday, I planted them. I mean, we just had rain the day before, so it was moist, wet soil. But I planted them, I watered them in, and I put a 24-inch high chicken wire around it that immediately. Now that chicken wire is open on the top and it's only going to protect them from the rabbits, rabbits, woodchucks. The deer would simply reach down in if they could get to it. This happens to be in a section of my garden that has a 2-wire electric fence around it. And even that is not absolute. I do use electric fence for deer. They're probably about every 25, 30 feet. There's a scent cap on the wire. And that smells like concentrated apple, and the deer will lick that or at least sniff it. Deer have hollow hair, so if they touch it with their bodies, they're never going to get a shock through it. They have to lick it. That's going to send them running, and it's been fairly successful. Though I don't have a lot of there's a lot of squash, green peppers in that garden. So it's not. But now that there's apples in there, it'll be interesting. I know last year I had some broccoli really close to my electric fence line, and they just reached right over it and ate those. So I still have to be cautious about the deer. But certainly, and this morning I was out there. I had rototilled right next to these trees to put some other garden plants in, and this morning I could see rabbit tracks in that tilled soil. So, they're there. Without that fence, my little growing experiment would be over. So was there another question that came in?
Yeah, we've had a few more questions come in. So Sean asks, what is the point of using an inner stem on a grafted tree?
Okay, well, the rootstocks that we choose impart some qualities. Mostly it's the size of the tree you're gonna end up with. But there's other things like adaptability to different soil types. There's resistance to fire blight. There's resistance to some insects that are imparted by that rootstock. You can an inner stem is simply doing 2 grafts on one tree. So you've got the rootstock that might decide that this is a 50% size tree. The inner stem, but maybe the rootstock you use doesn't have good fire blight resistance. The inner stem, you can graft another piece in there that would have fire blight resistance, and then on top put your desired variety. So you're basically doing 2 grafts on each tree, and the inner stem imparts some of that quality that you're looking for that's maybe not represented in your rootstock. Is that how you understand it, Jamie?
Yeah, for sure. I'm not super familiar because I've never done it myself, but I was recently talking to a researcher up in Minnesota who was working on experimenting with inner stems to improve rootstock to scion compatibility. So sometimes you'll graft something and it just doesn't like each other. Like even though they're both in malice and they should work, sometimes with certain varieties they don't. And so I have heard that also using an inner stem to kind of bridge those is a use that they're looking into. Okay, any tips on grafting to mature trees?
Yeah, I've done a little of this. One thing, we've talked about this before, is top working, where you've got you can cut off a tree that's, up to, I don't know, 6 inches in diameter trunk. You can cut the whole top off and graft onto that stump. That's called top working. You should be able to look that up and find out stuff about it. It's too late to do that this year. You can do that same type of technique just by lopping a branch off of an existing tree and grafting onto that using the same top working methods. Or you can take a small, say you've got a water shoot on a branch and you want something else there, you could use the methods we've just used and graft onto that. Timing, you're working on a tree that's outdoors, so you don't have the privilege of putting it into a root cellar and conditioning it while the graft is healing. So the timing is really critical. We say for grafting, for top working here, you should do it when you first see the first dandelion bloom. That puts you just into April for us. And even then you want to be lucky that when you do these grafts, we don't go way cold, say down into the teens, or really hot right away. We can see 80 in April in the right, well, in the wrong set of circumstances in any given year. So it's always a little risky when you do that stuff. But if I were going to do that, I would cheat a little early than late, because you really need a week or two of mild weather to get that thing healed before the sunshine convinces it to grow. You can do a graft like that, and I have done the things where I wrap insulative material around them so that they are protected from temperature and climate shifts. But that's a tricky thing to do without dislodging things. So you've got to be kind of, willing. It's not a sure thing process. You just have to try it a few times and see how it works. I've had quite a bit of top working luck, so I think that it's fun to play with.
On a related note, how do you bud graft?
Okay, bud grafting is something that is used a lot in commercial, in large scale production. So when I learned grafting, the first grafting I learned was bud grafting when I was working in a wholesale nursery, and we were grafting ornamental and shade trees. And that was, so the scenario is you have a rootstock, just like we worked with. We could take the same rootstocks we had for the class here and plant them out. And this is usually done in a nursery setting, so they're 12, 18 inches apart, in rows wide enough that you can kneel down and work next to them. And you can let them get established through into the middle of summer. And there's a point in the growing season when the bark starts to slip, is what we call it. And it means there's so much moisture in the bark, in the cambium layer, that you can make a cut in the bark and pop it open. The same is true on the scionwood. You've got a piece of scionwood off of a host tree, and you can cut under it and over it and pop the bud off, and you've got a little shield of bark that's got a bud on it, and you simply slide that in behind the cut you made on the rootstock. This is done for us here in the Cora, zone 4B. It's done usually very end of July and into August a little bit. So the bark needs to start slipping, and your buds that you borrow the scionwood from need to be mature. If you look at an immature bud, it might be reddish or green. Usually by later in the summer, they turn kind of looks like they've been dipped in coffee ground or chocolate. They're brown and a little bit fuzzy. So that's my indication for when they're mature enough to be grafted. So it's called T-budding. So you've got a rootstock, you make a vertical cut and a horizontal cut above it like a T. You take the tip of your knife and you can spread those, open them up. You cut the bud off the scionwood and slip it in, tape it up. It's the same tape that we used on this will work on budding. And that bud sits in there. It becomes part of the tree. You can usually look through that tape after about 10 days or 2 weeks and see white callus tissue surrounding the cut. So that'll give you an idea if your tree is healing or not. That bud sits in there until the following spring. The following spring, you cut it off just above that bud. And again, you keep cleaning off any excess unwanted shoots, and you'll have growth out that one bud. It's a simpler cut. It's easier to make these grafts, so it's quicker. And you can graft twice as many trees in a day, bud grafting, as you can bench grafting. So that's why it's used extensively in commercial production and big scale production. The take is probably not quite as good as bench grafting, the percentage, but you know, you're going so much faster that you can afford a little of that. So it's a fun process. I always enjoyed spending a couple weeks out in the field. My hamstrings didn't enjoy it because I usually did it standing up and bending over, working near the ground. But it's a really slick little process. But it's mostly used when you got numbers of things to do, of trees to make. As a hobby grafter, I'd really mostly do the bench grafts because you got a much higher chance of success, more control.
All right, our next question asks, do you have any suggestions for a highly fire blight resistant pear interstem? I'm using OHXF 333 pear rootstock, which is supposed to be fire blight resistant, but it isn't, or it doesn't seem to control it too well. And also, can you graft the interstem and the fruiting wood at the same time, or should you wait a few weeks or a season in between?
I really don't know much at all about pear rootstocks or interstem. I can't discuss that at all with you because I've never looked into it. I would think if you were grafting a tree, I would do both grafts at once. I see no reason to wait a year. And if you wait a few weeks, you run the risk of dislodging the graft you already did.
Yeah. Again, I've never done it either, but I would assume that that's correct. And same situation with me, not super familiar with pears. But I want to say it's the University of Virginia. Um, I think it's University of Virginia has a lot of information on pears. So you could always look that up or contact your extension office. A lot of times they'll have more experience with this sort of thing, and especially the processes that are more common in commercial orchards. The extension offices are really good about that.
I also, and Jamie probably, we've had very little fire blight here. I've hardly ever seen it in our area. So I have very little experience with that too.
Yeah. Again, I've never seen it. The only time I've seen it is actually visiting an orchard down in Missouri, which is 6 hours south of us. So, um, yeah. Alrighty. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to raise your hand or pop those in the chat. But it looks like we're getting down to the end here.
I'll add one more thing. I have in years past occasionally had, I'm just thinking about how Iowa has had some high winds lately. I have had some trees break off in their first year at the Graft Union. Um, so, um, it wouldn't be unreasonable to stick say, a fiberglass electric fence post in next to your tree and tie it up. Um, that's not going to hurt the tree a bit if you use a nice soft stretchy material to tie with, and and it could save you from a heartbreak. I had a neighbor of mine, I top worked a tree for him last spring, spring of 23, and I could see it every day when I drove by, and oh boy, it put out a lot of nice growth. And midsummer we had and I would say there was 30 inches or more growth on it, and we had a wind and it just broke them all off. And that was hard to take. So if you're in a wind prone area, it wouldn't hurt to stake them.
Yeah, that's great advice, and especially with the M7. We sent out M7 because it's a smaller tree, but it can stand on its own. But any young tree really does benefit from staking, especially like Lindy was saying, with wind or any sort of questionable weather. Just giving that tree the best chance to grow upright rather than leaning or falling is definitely best practice. Oh, we got a few more questions coming in. So, some of my grafted trees suffered from a hard freeze with a quarter inches of growth before I disbudded. I have been waiting about 3 weeks to see if any new buds will grow back, but nothing so far. How long should I wait before accepting the loss?
I would wait a while. I think that could still push growth out the same bud. Most trees, all trees have secondary buds that kind of lay next to the primary bud. Um, and that could easily push new shoot. So I give it plenty of time. I noticed there was something about the next time we meet. So when do you happen to know? That's
I
this fall.
Let's see. I have it on my calendar somewhere. One second. Oh,
So
here we go.
this fall, we have a session scheduled where we talk about winterizing, basically we've already covered this some, but we'll have a video on how to wrap them up and make sure the rodents don't get to them and things like that.
Right, so I just found it on my calendar. Looks like it is October 4th at 1 p.m. Central Time.
Okay, was there anything else?
I think that's just about got it. Awesome. Well, thank you for tuning in, everybody. Please be in contact if you have any questions between now and the next session. Feel free to send us an email. We're happy to help you out there. Yeah, we'll see you in October.
Goodbye. Thank you. Very, very informative.
Thank you.